So on to tonight's special guest. The Ford Conservation Center is a regional conservation facility and division of History Nebraska that offers services to private individuals, museums, and libraries, corporations, and state and federal agencies. Their services include conservation, examination, and treatment of 3D objects, paintings, and works of paper, which is why we are here tonight, as well as consultations on many collection-related topics. The staff of the Ford Center represents years of varied professional training, specialized study, and intensive experience in the art and science of conservation. Ford Center conservators have trained and worked at major cultural institutions in the US and abroad, while keeping up to date on the latest research and innovations in conservation practice. With us tonight is Kenneth Bé, Hilary LeFevere, and Rebecca Cashman, the painting, paper, and object conservators at the Ford. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them to introduce a little bit more about themselves. So go ahead and join me in welcoming them to tonight's presentation.
I'm Kenneth Bé. I'm the painting conservator at the Ford Conservation Center. Some of you have already seen me at work with the painting that's the centerpiece of the exhibit here, but I'll tell you a little bit more about my field and some things which you maybe have not seen in the exhibit itself. Okay. So what we have here is a wide-angle view of the Painting Conservation Center lab at the Ford Center. You see I have a lot of paintings, and that's what I'm working on normally during the day, paintings that come from anywhere in a day's drive from Omaha. So as far away as Wichita or Cedar Rapids or the Panhandle area or up to Sioux Falls even. And a painting to me is anything that is painted on. So canvas, wood, walls, murals, metal is sometimes painted on. And it is art that ranges from the 16th or 17th century up to the 20th and 21st century. And most of what I work on in Omaha is really from the last century or so. This is a view of my lab and the work that is sometimes cluttered and crowded in there. That's all at work. I'm multitasking. Paintings are not just the images that you see on the walls of galleries and museums, but in fact, I view them, and most conservators like me view them as three-dimensional objects, very much like a decorative object or a textile or a work on paper. It has the paint on top of another layer, sometimes on top of another layer, which is on top of the canvas, which is attached to a wooden stretcher. And so all those different layers interact, and anything that goes wrong with one layer can affect the look of the other layers. So, for example, here in this painting, it's the same view of the same painting. In the lower part of this image, you see an X radiograph, and it shows that there's a rather nasty cut in the canvas, an old damage that goes right through the eye of that portrait. And here's that same portrait. You can see that spot there is now covered over with a retouching, which shows black in this ultraviolet fluorescence image, and a whole section of the right side of the portrait, which is retouching done later on. So what I've shown you are two images, one that shows the interior structure of the painting, and one that shows the surface. And I'm constantly looking at paintings and layers to see how what affects the lower part of the picture also affects the upper part. So then to remind you, there are structural problems, nasty things that go on like tears here, damages like paint losses, scrapes, flaking. And then there's the issue of cleaning. This painting is half cleaned, and you can see on each side what a difference it makes just to clean off a layer of soot and grime. And so there are necessary things that have to be taken care of, like the first aid that has to be given to a painting that is structurally deteriorating, that is in danger of losing parts of itself from its condition. And then there are the optional things that we do, like cleaning, which is what we actually think conservation is all about sometimes. We're restoring, we're cleaning, we're making the picture look closer to its original appearance. But in fact, we have to take care of the structural problems and the cosmetic problems as well. And so in fact, I see paintings as layers. And even the painting that's in the exhibit here, I'm seeing how it's constantly showing off what it's painted on and the structure of the paint above it. The paint can go wrong in ways that you can see it ruptures, it cracks, and it breaks loose from the canvas. And these are little schematic diagrams. This shows, in fact, this shows what it looks like when you have a very severe flaking and you're losing these flakes. These flakes are standing up on the canvas, just like you see here. But here you see that going on in full force, very, very severe flaking. And what do we do about that? We have to take care of these problems with consolidants and with tools that use heat and pressure to be able to coax these faulty paint layers back into place again. I'm showing this contemporary painting by Anselm Kiefer because this is a painting. It's also sort of sculpture in a way. It has pieces of canvas and grit and sand and, in fact, metal pieces attached to it. And his paintings are actually about destruction, and he wants that decayed look to it. But when we look in detail at some sections, like this piece hanging loose and these sections that are very, very precarious, a museum that owns this painting doesn't actually want to lose those parts. So this is a way that we want to preserve the look of deterioration by keeping it in a perpetual state of looking like it is coming apart, but in fact it's stabilized by the modern efforts of conservation. This shows another thing that I might do to a painting, which is called lining. It is a canvas. Here, this is a fragment of The Corn Room by Grant Wood, and it is mounted onto a canvas that is pressured together through vacuum suction, and there's a heat set adhesive that holds that canvas permanently onto that new backing. And so that's lining, and that's something else I might do frequently at the Ford Center to get pictures to last much, much longer. But as I said, I'm often cleaning pictures, and cleaning is another important thing that we do to restore the look of the picture. It's not necessary, but it certainly gives you a better idea of how the picture once looked. And when we have a yellowed varnish layer, like you see here, it completely masks and compresses the image, and we can no longer see the contrasts. And one could actually say we would no longer be able to read what the painting is about. And so we clean paintings because we want to know what they're about. We want to see the colors, the contrasts, and derive meaning from that restored look of the picture. Another scene, this is a large painting of the Indian hunting buffalo that came out of a bar in Nebraska City. And you'll be amused to know it was used as a dartboard behind the bar. And these large rectangular areas are where they had posted with glue all the prices of the beer that was for sale there. So it's not until I arrived in Omaha that I started finding unusual situations like this to have to get through and clean. And then this very beautiful profile image by Angel Decorah, an artist from the Winnebago tribe. And this was a very personal portrait made of a member of her tribe when she came back after many years back to her tribe as an artist and painted this in the, I think it was in the beginning of the 20th century. And this was brought to me by descendants of the woman in the portrait. And here it is covered in dirt and grime. And here it has been lined, like I showed in that Grant Wood. It's back on a new canvas backing, and it's been cleaned, so you can now read the picture again. And this man, you would be interested to know, is one of the only known oil portraits of Peter Sarpy, as in Sarpy County, which those of you who live in Papillion or La Vista would know, or Bellevue. And this is a picture belonging to the Historical Society, and it has been cleaned and it has been lined as well. It has been structurally improved. This is one of the Grantwood corn room fragments from Council Bluffs. And I show this to show how much retouching is involved. This is a piece about the size of the painting that's on display here at the exhibit, and it shows an extensive amount of paint loss over time and all the retouching that had to be done to integrate that image. And retouching is done with resins and pigments. I have a large supply of pigments here, and it's done just inside those areas so that I can mask off those white fills, but never to reinterpret the painting itself. That's a very important point. We're letting the picture show itself of what survives of the original just by doing the retouching in between the losses. Sometimes, as in this portrait here, if you look at the before treatment, and this is the after treatment, this coat of arms was put on about 100 years after the painting was painted and did not belong there in the first place. And so it is actually still there, but it's masked over by my retouching that mimics the background of this picture. So that's to show you again that the retouching is done sometimes to bring the picture back to its original look, and the cleaning is also done to bring the picture back to its original look, where the meaning of a painting is derived from how it appears to you. And this painting by Lucioni, which is in the Sheldon Museum in Lincoln, is called Arrangement in White. And this is the painting on the left before treatment, and it came in with this very distinct yellow hue. And it was only after cleaning the painting that you could really understand what he was about with his title of the painting, Arrangement in White. I'm going to close with showing you this picture, which is currently at the Beach Museum in Manhattan, Kansas, at Kansas State University. It's by the artist John Stewart Curry, and it's called Sunrise over Kansas, from around, I think, 1934. And if you look at the center, the sun has this very distinct discoloration that's kind of a brownish, grayish color. And that is due because of the use of materials that he used to try to enhance, to actually make that sun more brilliant and more outstanding in the landscape. He mixed materials that caused it to darken in no time. And that's how we ended up with the look like you see here, where it was completely unexhibitable when they acquired the painting. And through studying the picture and understanding that it did not look like that originally, I was commissioned by the Beach Museum to do retouching that still allowed parts of the original to show through, but added just enough of microscopic white filaments of retouching to make those discolorations essentially disappear. And so the look of the picture now is, much more in keeping with its original title, Sunrise over Kansas. So that's a little sort of teaser on what I do in painting conservation and the reason why I do these treatments. And Hilary will talk next about her work as a paper conservator.
Hi, can you hear me? Great. I'm Hilary LeFevere. I'm the paper conservator at the Ford Conservation Center. That's me. I'll tell you just a little bit of my background to start with. I came to conservation through art history, like a lot of people do. I have a BA in art history. I have a master's in art history from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And at that program, I kind of decided I wanted to be a little more hands-on with the art. So from there, I went to get a conservation degree specified with works of art on paper. So I treat all kinds of works of art on paper and documents, and we're going to look at a few of them in a minute here. So I guess I could turn this way. This is my lab at the Ford Center. You can see it's kind of similar to Kenneth's, but I've got some specialized equipment here. So this is a gigantic sink for washing artifacts. I've got a suction table similar to what Kenneth was talking about. I've got a lot of flat file storage over here for paper materials, a light table, and a gigantic kind of guillotine cutter for making boxes and cutting boards and that sort of thing. All right, so I work on a lot of documents in the paper lab. That's one of the most common things that we treat. They have all kinds of issues, but predominantly lots of tears, lots of structural problems. You can see there's a big loss here. This is very common with documents and works of art and other types of paper artifacts. You can see same kind of thing here. There's a big loss here. We work to kind of repair areas like this where maybe paper is folded behind, or we can repair it. Big tear here. And here's another example of the same sort of structural problems, but this also is kind of a good example of what we work on a lot of times in the paper lab. We get a lot of family heirloom type of things, wedding certificates, confirmations, baptismals. We get lots of documents like this in the paper lab. We also get lots of works of art on paper. So this would be an example of a museum piece. The issues here, you can see there's matte burn around the edge here. So a lot of times with paper, we're dealing with issues like it's been framed with improper materials. Maybe it's been stored next to something that's really acidic. So we kind of work to counteract problems like staining, other issues related to discoloration. We work to just preserve the artifacts. Here's kind of the worst of the worst, maybe, type of situation. This would be another work of art on paper, but this is a print. So we do all kinds of prints as well. Engravings, etchings, posters. This one has tape around most of the edges, as you can see. It's got staining here and, well, kind of everywhere. A big tear here, and all these little splotchy white areas are actually insect damage. So yeah, that's pretty bad. And here's just another example. This would be like another family heirloom type of item. This was rolled and then it was crushed and then it was stored in a plastic bag for 60 years. So this is sort of the result. So we had to put it back together like a giant puzzle, and that's what we got. So we also work on paper-based photographs in the paper lab. Usually we're dealing with issues like fixing the image layer itself. So places like in the face right here where the image is actually lost. That's a lot of what we deal with. Also cleaning. You can see all of this dirt and soiling up here. We also work on books, cloth bound, leather bound. We usually see Bibles is what we get honestly the most of, but they will have similar issues to this. Missing spines, detached covers, broken sewing. And last but not least, parchment, which is not paper, is actually animal skin. So it's not a plant-based material, but it's actually usually derived from sheep or goat or something like that. And they get these kinds of damages, lots of distortions. They're very sensitive to moisture and humidity. So we kind of work to flatten them and clean them up. So we get quite a range of things that are paper and beyond at the Ford Center. All right, now I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite projects that I've worked on. in the last few years. This is a sporting license that was issued to Amelia Earhart in 1928. This came from the Truman Library. And you can see her signatures right here, which is really cool. And right next to it is Orville Wright's signature. So this was extra fun. This was like extreme history in one piece. But you see it's got all of this discoloration, staining, something got stuck there and it made a big mess. So this is why it was sent to us. They wanted us to see what we could do to reduce this discoloration and also this little area of discoloration around the photograph. So we did testing, which we do with every project that comes into the Ford Center. We do various types of tests to figure out what's going to be the best option for treating it. And this was kind of like a dual treatment piece, but I found actually the easiest way to reduce a lot of this, because it was an accretion stuck in the top layer of the paper, was to pick it off with a scalpel blade under the microscope. So that actually worked pretty well to reduce a lot of this discoloration over here, but it didn't do all of it. So I did some localized wet cleaning, and we did it locally specifically because this is double-sided. So we don't want to disrupt any of these sensitive signatures on the other side, because that's obviously the most important part. So I used a rigid gel material, and I cut it and applied it directly to the artifact. And that kind of functions as a poultice to draw out the staining. So that's kind of a trick we can do to do localized cleaning. So I was able to do that over most of the stain, and it helped quite a bit. And then I also did it on this side. The staining wasn't as bad over here, but we were able to apply it to both sides. But I had to take this photo off first, which was funny because I didn't realize it wasn't a professional photo. And when I had flipped it up, I noticed that it was clearly clipped out of a magazine or a newspaper, because there's printed text on the other side. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Like, you wouldn't get away with that now. So here's the before and after. You can still see the staining, but it's quite a bit better. It's better preserved on both sides. And another treatment that I really enjoyed working on, I did this this year actually. This is a crayon enlargement from a Civil War portrait of a soldier. So this item it's on a layered board structure. It's three-dimensional and it's convex. So it's got like kind of a bubble shape to it. So hence the gigantic tears. And unfortunately, somebody used the abrasive side of a sponge to clean it, and they didn't do maybe the best job because a lot of the image is gone. So we had a lot of things to figure out with this one, but it was, I don't know, sometimes that makes it more fun. So here you can see some of the layer structure. You can see how brittle it is over here and how many tiny little tears there are. Here we are applying an adhesive just around the edges, just so we can work on it and handle it without causing other damage, because these things are they're so brittle. They just want to fall right apart. So that just helps us to be able to work on the back of it. So now we're on the back. This is the beginning of the repairs to put it back together. So these little white wormy things, this is Japanese paper. We use that often to do tear repairs on paper artifacts. So we were able to start at the top, and then we worked our way in. So where the tears weren't so bad to the worst spots over here. These brown gray things are bag weights. So we use those for drying. And we also use these magnets to hold smaller pieces together. This is kind of the reverse of what we were just looking at, but it's all kind of put back together. But these red things, these are cloth covered bricks. So it's kind of keeping the piece restrained, and we're keeping it underweight so it all dries together. That way it's more stable once it's all fit back together. And okay, now it's all together. So you can see from the front, we've still got a lot of little tiny losses in these cracks. So at that point, I had to fill them in with using a microscope, tweezers, and little paper fibers and adhesive, and just kind of shove the paper in there and fill in the cracks, because that makes it more stable, and also it looks better when it's done. So this is a fill, kind of similar treatment to this, but larger scale. And then finally, we did some toning. So there's your before and after. And last but not least, I'll just tell you really quickly about a recent project that we worked on in the paper lab. So we got a call from a rare books library, and they'd recently had a construction project done. They thought that their rare books rooms were sealed off, but unfortunately they were not. And the HVAC system pushed drywall dust into both of the rooms and all over all the books. Yeah, and all over the cabinets and furniture, even in these sealed cases. So it was quite a mess. And it was a really big undertaking. There were about 60 of these cabinets and 5 freestanding double-sided shelves that were 15 feet long. So we kind of had to come from it at a methodical, really methodical kind of like vantage point. So with each cabinet, we started on the top shelf, take the books down, clean the shelf. We did this with a HEPA filter vacuum, so we don't release any of that drywall dust back into the room. And then we clean the books. And actually we clean the books by the same method. So this is a little hose with a tiny soft brush attachment that's attached to the HEPA filter vacuum. And using this, we can clean the books. Luckily, we didn't have to clean inside of the books, we just had to clean the outside. So the spine, the covers, and the exposed text block. Too far. Here's an example of one of the books that got it pretty bad with the drywall dust. You can see these are fingerprints, and this is the hazy, cloudy stuff is the drywall dust. And it came from right here. Let's see how, yeah, it was a bit of a mess. And that's what it looked like afterwards. So it was fairly successful. It took 4 of us, plus Kenneth and Rebecca, working on their own different objects. It took us about 3 weeks working full time to clean about 11,000 books. So this is just 7,000 of them, just for reference. So yeah, that was a pretty interesting project to work on. We don't usually get to do something of that large of a scale. So, but yeah, everything's kind of in our wheelhouse. So that's the paper lab. And I'll hand it over to Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Cashman. I'm the Objects Conservator at the Ford Center. My background is in studio art, and I actually didn't know about conservation until my senior year of undergrad. So I heard about this job where it was a little bit of anthropology, a little bit of archaeology, a little bit of art history, and also working with your hands. And so I thought that might be what I want to do, because I wasn't really sure before that. So I went on an archaeological dig in Syria and worked with an archaeological conservator. And after that, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I've been in conservation for about 20 years now, 14 of which has been at the Ford Center. I'm not even on my own slides yet. Okay, that's me. So this is the Objects Lab. It's where everything that's not a work on paper or work on painting, or a painting, I should say, ends up. Although we do work on a lot of objects that have paper and painted elements. If you look around, you'll see frames, ceramic. This is an archaeological Dutch oven lid, polychrome sculpture, more archaeological objects, a trade cloth dress that's part of our History Nebraska collection. Oh. So we work on all sorts of materials. One thing that comes into the lab a lot is glass, which is broken, like this communion cup I repaired. Sorry, I'm having troubles with this. This is a shattered ceramic bust by 𝘗𝘮𝘢𝘗𝘢𝘗𝘗. This is a cup from the Truman Library where we remove the corrosion. We do a lot of that at the Ford Center as well. This is that trade cloth dress I just showed you. This is, if you look on the left-hand side, you'll notice these are silk ribbons. This dress is probably from about the 1890s, and silk in the 1850s and the late 19th century typically was weighted with metallic salts to make it heavier so they could sell it for more. But this is the result we see. The salts interact with elements of the silk and they're shattering. So you've probably seen this at museums yourself. But anyway, in these two slides, you see before, and then on the right is after, where I've stabilized the silk by putting sheer fabric overlays on it. We get a lot of frames. So a lot of the times for frames, we're dealing with ornamentation that falls off and we're recreating those elements, as you see in these two pictures. Now this is my favorite type of project. If you can't tell what it is a side saddle. And this side saddle is said to have belonged to Mary Lucretia Creighton, who was, one of the founders of Creighton University. So this is a project I did when I first came to the Ford Conservation Center. And I like this project a lot, not only because it's local, but because of all of the materials and all of the problems that are present. So we see 5 different types of leather, some coated, some not coated. There's textiles. Believe it or not, this is a textile right here. This is a saddle blanket. Composed of wool, layers of cotton muslin, burlap. There's copper alloy elements, iron alloy. It's just a great problem project. So the main focus for this project was stabilizing the object so that it actually could be displayed, and of course so that none of the original material would be lost. So we were very careful with this, not to, and this goes for all projects, if there's a use object, our goal isn't just to make it look like new. In this case, we wanted to preserve some of the damage from use. We could see little marks from, the saddle being used where it was sat upon, and, also from leg abrasion, things like that. So we didn't do anything to those areas, but you can see there's a lot of tear repair going on, and creation of replacement elements as well, as you see on the left. So this is a detail of me working on the saddle blanket. It's composed of 5 layers of fabric. The top is a wool blend, and then there's different layers of burlap in the center, and the bottom is cotton muslin, and all 5 were just torn to pieces. So this job is not for everyone, because for this type of thing, you have to basically sit there and rearrange all of the shreds of fabric until they're in place, and then back every single one so that the object can be stabilized so we can handle it and it can be displayed in the future. And here's what it looked like after. So we've kept, you can see up here, it doesn't look new, but we were careful to keep these areas of use like I was talking about previously. This is another favorite project. It is for a Jade Bottle from the Truman Library. We get a lot of great projects from them. So this bottle is said to have, well, it was given to Truman by H.H. Kung in 1945. He was the then premier of China. And we know from museum records that Harry Truman wrote a nice thank you note and said that it was displayed on the mantle at the White House. So unfortunately, at some point, it fell off. So on the left, this is the base that it was on, and that's broken too. But this is just a beautiful piece. The whole jade piece, including the chain and the bottle on top, or I'm sorry, the top of the bottle, are all carved from a single piece of jade. And there's these dragons and trees. This is a bird that was on the top at one point. That is the wing. It's missing a tail. It's just a mess. In addition to that, on the base, there would have been a support stand to hold up the jade chain. And we know that because I've seen a lot of other images of such stands. And also in these notches right here, there were remnants of a stand that was there before. So it would have been a piece like that. You'll see, it'll make more sense in the next images. So this project was great because it involved a lot of detective work. Because there were so many missing parts, and in conservation, we're really careful not to recreate something that would be deceptive. I was in a lot of contact with staff at the Truman Library about, well, I know what the missing wing would look like. I just have to create a reverse wing, but there's a tail that's missing, and I'm not sure what that looks like, and I'm not even sure what direction this bird goes on the bottle topper. You'd think that would be obvious, but there was so much loss, I just couldn't figure it out. So I was working with them, and they were, we were having a lot of discussions, and they were sending me images from their archive. So that's always fun when it's like a mystery that you're solving. And on the right, you just see me creating links so that the chain can function as a chain. So on the left, I am trying to figure out what that chain support is supposed to look like. And I basically looked at a lot of different similar images of jade bottles from China that were displayed in a similar way. And on the right, you'll see I'm working on the stand on my lap, and I'm actually on my patio because this project was done during the beginning of COVID. My son, who's right there right now, his school was canceled. So there's not many things I was able to work on at home because obviously we can't bring artifacts home with us, but that was one of them. So I have a lot of memories of, working on that stand with my cat on the patio. Okay, so this is what it looked like before on the left, of course, and on the right is after. So it's stable. I've done some subtle things like made adjustments to the base so that that's more stable and that the bottle itself rests more securely in it. And also this resembles what it would have looked like when it was displayed on the mantle at the White House during the Truman years. Okay, this is the final project I'll talk about. This is a project that we're currently working on in the Objects Lab. This is kind of like a teaser slide or a hint. So the objects are in this picture, which was taken in the 1940s. This is another picture from the 60s, and the objects are also visible. So if you have not guessed, that is a St. Margaret Mary. The church banners are currently in our labs. So what you see are 6 banners that were there since the beginning of the church. They're made of cotton and velvet and linen. They're made in Switzerland. I don't know if I mentioned that, but they represent the 4 liturgical seasons, as well as there's 2 of the white banners. One is for the Blessed Mother and the other is for the Eucharist. So these were hung on and off over decades at the church. And they have liturgical symbols on both sides of each banner. The special part of these banners is that it's kind of hard to see in these slides because they're dark, but oh yeah, it's really hard to see. You'll be able to see in the next slides. Anyway, there's a lot of leather strips and leather shapes that have been added to these liturgical images. And these leather elements have been gilded with gold leaf. So when they actually reflect light in this really striking way. Here is the banner for the Pentecost. And this is the first one we worked on. It looks, you can see what the imagery is, right? When you're looking at an overall shot. But this is what they look like close up. So the fabric substrate is in great condition. And actually some of the leather is in very good condition too. You can see how it's there's like a gleam because a lot of the gilding is still there. But if you go further to the left and up above, you'll see the leather is in various states of degradation, basically. It's brittle, it's shrunken, and in a lot of cases, it's just fallen off. So here's another example. This is a ray coming from the cross. So this leather strip is pretty good, actually. It's still flexible, it's still sewn to the fabric substrate, but then nearby, it's just, these little pieces are just hanging on by stitches, basically. So of course, for this project, one of the goals was to recreate the gilded leather pieces that are missing. And we went about this by, like we do for all projects, by testing a lot of different materials and trying to figure out which would be the most stable over time and which is also going to be easy, is going to be easy for us to work with, basically, because we're doing 12 of these banners. So we need something we can use for everything that we can depend on. So on the right, this is one of the replacement strips I've created. It is actually not leather. We decided against using leather because, well, for a lot of different reasons. For this project, basically, we wanted something more stable. And also we were going to have to create different gilded leather reproduction elements of different thicknesses. Sometimes to entirely replace lost areas, sometimes we needed to put them on top of the leather. So we needed the flexibility that the polyester, spun-bond polyester fabric would give us. So creating these reproductions was not the difficult part of this project. The difficult part, I would say, is trying to figure out how to truly conserve these banners, meaning what do we do so that the leather that's there will remain there? Because we've seen what happens, just by looking at that one detail. You can see on the same banner, some of the leather is in vastly different shape. And we don't know, like all materials age, so we don't know when it's going to suffer the same fate. I mean, hopefully not for a long time. But anyway, to truly conserve these banners, we had to think of a way to protect that leather as well, even though it looks good now. So sometimes with things like textile conservation, if there's a very shattered, delicate material, we end up creating sheer fabric overlays to sew over it to keep it in place. And we do that because you can see through it, so you can see what the original material looks like. So we were kind of thinking along those lines, but the challenge with this project is that part of why these banners are so striking is because of that reflection that's coming off the gilding. So we had to find something we could put over the gilding that wouldn't interfere with light reflection. So we tested a lot of different materials, basically everything we had in the lab that seemed like it might work. And finally, we ended up discovering this very fine gold net. You can see my hand right through it. So we were very excited about this because finally, we could put this material right over the gilding and see the gold through it. We shine the lights on it and we could, it looked great. So we started testing, and this is just a test strip. This is a phone picture, so that's why it kind of looks like that. But that's just my initial test. So it looks great on the object, but the material is so fine and flexible. And since it's a net, trying to sew it around something and have it, I could not do it and confidently, know that it was working. It was snagging. It was, it was just deforming, and also very importantly, it just looked terrible. So we thought, well, if only, we like the net, but if we need like a reinforced net that we can sew through, but we also need a reinforced net that's reinforced in a way that you can't see the reinforcement. So this is what we do a lot of the times in all the labs, is we just end up creating our own products. This is I did a lot of testing for this, trying to create this dream material that we could use on the banners. Because I knew once we figured it out for this banner, we could just apply it to all of the projects or the other banners, because they all have the same issues. So I'll just give you a brief. Okay, so I'll just run through this really quickly. Okay, that's me holding the net, and on top of it is a sheer polyester organza. So I basically layer those two fabrics. I create a template of the shape I want to create an overlay for, which you see on the left right there. And then on the right, I have cranked this tacking iron up to about 350 degrees, and I just sear through those layers of fabric. So I've actually melded them together. Oh, that was the surprise. Anyway, on the left, that's my shape. And on the right, you'll see I'm cutting off all of the excess organza that's not melded to the net. And then this is the shape. So it doesn't look like much, but here it is. Here's what we've sewn over the gilded leather. And we've done the same thing for the other shapes too. So this is a solution that's working that we're very excited about. So this is going on for all of the leather on the banners, the same procedure. You can see on the left, it looks kind of messy at first, but then we trim the edges. Oops. Okay, so to refresh your memory, this is what it looked like before, the detail. And this is what it looks like after all the overlays are in place. And this is before and after. We're holding up those banners in the lab. So you can see, actually it's kind of hard to see, but I'm happy with this result, because actually, the banners, I feel like they look like what they once did, in the 1940s when they initially were hung. And also we can be confident that they are truly stabilized, so that future generations of the church can enjoy them as well. And now we're working on the green banner. So we'll be continuing to work on 4 more banners throughout the year, as well as all the other projects that come into the Objects Lab. So I just want to say thank you, and let us know if you have any questions.
All right, so we will definitely do some audience questions, but first I have a couple of kind of questions we had planned, and any of you can jump in. So the first one we wanted to ask you all was, if you could tell us the most difficult project you've ever undertaken, and with that, is there ever and this is probably not the correct lingo, but is there ever a project you were unable to save or conserve that you just had to say, we can't do anything to help with this project?
I guess I'm going first. Most difficult project. Ooh, that's a little tricky. Okay, I'm going to skip that one. However, in terms of not being able to save something, probably a few years ago, I would have said, yeah, I can't do that. But after you get a lot of experience working with really damaged items, there's usually something you can do to at least help preserve it, do some kind of stabilization for it. It's not always going to look amazing, but we can almost always do something to help an artifact, I would say. There are a few things that have come into the Ford Center that we cannot repair. And mostly it's because of gravity. I'm thinking of a bronze horse
that came to the Objects Lab years ago, and its tail had been broken off. If it was made of another material, let me back up a little. It's because in conservation, we follow a code of ethics, so we generally don't, like drill into things, disturb original material, strip original paint, things like that. So yeah, there was a bronze horse, and because of what we can and can't ethically do, we could not put this tail back on. We tried so many different types of adhesives because we thought we would, ideally go the reversible route, because all of our repairs should be reversible. But this tail, because of how heavy it was, we just couldn't do anything to it. And there's another sculpture with a similar problem that we had to turn away.
Yeah, okay. I won't say anything in particular, any particular projects, but in general, contemporary painting, contemporary art can be very, very challenging because of the ephemerality of the materials. They can be extremely difficult to clean, and the look of a lot of contemporary art has that sort of seamless, faultless surface that, especially in abstract paintings, which are very easily damaged and even more difficult to repair perfectly, so that the eye, which is so sensitive to seeing little differences, can often see the treatments that a conservator will do. The other problem is when you encounter a painting that has been heavily, heavily damaged from past treatment efforts, abrasion, for example, entire removal of a fine glaze or fine paint layer that leaves the painting just peppered with losses or complete loss of detail. And in those cases, sometimes paintings will come to me which are so heavily compromised that I just have to tell the client, the owner, the museum, that there's some risk in doing the treatment, and do they really want to go through another treatment of a piece that has been so far gone. Sometimes it's worthwhile if it's a Leonardo da Vinci, for example.
I just wanted to say one more thing. We've gotten a lot of projects in the Objects Lab recently that are of modern materials, and those we can treat. I'm talking about like plastic and polyester resin, things like that. Some artifacts made of things like cellulose nitrate, plastic. So those are a problem and will continue to be a problem in museums because a lot of those plastics degrade and there's absolutely nothing you can do about them, unfortunately. Sometimes for these objects, I'm thinking in particular about one was a protractor belonging to a historic figure. We got it at the Ford Center and we took it out a year later for treatment. And our technician said, was this wet before? I don't remember this being wet. Because there were droplets of nitric acid forming on the surface. So this protractor was from probably the 1930s, looked in perfect condition when we got it. And when it arrived at the Ford, this is from a museum too. They kept great care of it. It arrived at the Ford Center, was in, climate controlled storage. But in the matter of days, this protractor just started seizing up and nitric acid was bubbling up on the surface. Fumes were coming out. We had to put it under a fume extractor. We had to actually restrain this object, but we didn't want to touch it. So this is just an example of the type of object that we can't really treat. We could help them kind of minimize the damage. But I'm not sure what happened to this object once it went back to the museum. But they basically, there are a lot of objects made of modern materials that require special storage conditions. And even if they have those special storage conditions, sometimes they're just bound to deteriorate and we can't do anything about it. So.
Very interesting. Thank you. We can definitely take some audience questions as well. I don't know if anybody wants to start us off. Perfect.
Where is the Ford Center located?
Do you know where Hanscom Park is? There's a beautiful garden that's taken care of by the city. And then there's a long brick building. We're at 1326 South 32nd Street, which is kind of diagonal from Hanscom Park.
We did have a question come in on the chat as well during your talk. Linda, I believe was her name, noted that lots of your photos had that color block next to the objects. I know we use that here too in our cataloging of our items. Could you speak a little bit about that? Anybody?
Yeah, the color checker. That's the color block and actually, Hilary, I feel you have more special indicators in yours. Am I right? Like sometimes you have an additional thing we don't use an object because we have like 3D, and so we just have a color checker. But you also have I'm not even sure what that's called.
You know, I'm not really sure what it's called either, but it's a little like strip of paper with a sticky uppy thing. It kind of measures like the degree of the lighting in the photo lab. So we don't actually do the photos ourselves. Our senior technician does them for us. She's our in-house photographer. So that's just kind of to make sure the lighting's at the same angle, because especially with paper artifacts, it can be just wildly different, even if the lighting's only a foot further back. So the color block, it just helps to check that you have got your exposure right, contrast is right, and then it kind of helps to edit the photos later once they're like on the computer.
So it's really more for documentation purposes. Is that
Yep.
fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from our live audience? Make me walk all the way back there, huh? Just kidding. Okay, go ahead. I'll repeat your question for the online audience. So for those watching online, the question was, how much do they work together basically among the labs?
Yeah. So as far as collaboration versus no collaboration, in the paintings lab, I tend to work pretty much solitary on most of my projects all the time. It's just by the nature of the projects that come in, and maybe also the nature of how I work. I have a sort of a very self-contained series of procedures and treatments that I'm quite used to handling just on my own. But I would say in some other labs, there might be a little bit more collaboration going on.
I would say that Hilary and I sometimes have projects that overlap, especially if they involve leather. And I'd say, you know, we share our own experience with past projects, and if you know, we've collaborated on projects. I'm not sure if there are any that were in the images you saw. Do you think? Oh, the coffee ad. Yes. This is hard to explain, but it was a giant particle board coffee ad. I mean, it was like 5 feet tall. So it was actually painted. So we all worked on it. Yeah, it just depends on the project. And of course, in objects, we have a lot of heavier things that I need help, other people's help moving them. Sometimes it's like a 4-person job.
And then one other thing I can actually say that is sort of collaborative is that each lab has its own specialized types of tools and equipment. And so the paper lab certainly has tools that we don't have in the paper or the objects lab. And I have a table that heats up and draws a vacuum that can be useful sometimes in applications of paper. So I'm always on hand to collaborate with lending a hand in the use of equipment and the way these particular contraptions have very specialized functions. So yes, it's very good to have colleagues across the wall. As a regional conservation center where we are like a clinic in the region where people can bring works of art, it's extremely fortunate to have all these 3 disciplines of conservation all under one roof where we can do this sort of thing. And it's also sort of one-stop shopping for the client who might come in with a range of objects, and they can drop them all off into different labs and have us work collaboratively. It's also really useful when someone brings a piece to me and they get a tour of the lab and get to see what else is going on. They think, aha, I actually have a such and such object that I should have brought to the paper lab or the objects lab. And so it works kind of symbiotically, that we can generate more work by being an assortment of conservation professions under one roof.
At least in two of your work, and maybe all three, I saw hands and fingers touching the objects. Do you not worry about skin oils, or is that all part of the patina or process?
Yeah, in paintings, I usually don't have to. I'm fine working with my fingertips. Everything is kept clean. And in fact, the tactile sense of touch and being able to feel what I'm working on and know exactly how much pressure or the feel of the surface of an object is extremely important in my work. But I know you have to sometimes use gloves of different types.
Yeah, it kind of depends on the project. Like, we're aware that we could transfer our finger oils to objects. We're very careful about washing our hands about 200 times a day. You can't see our hands, what they look like. But yeah, I mean, I use gloves when I can, but some projects, the gloves actually get in the way. So I just am really careful about repeatedly washing my hands.
Yeah, it's kind of the same for me. Sometimes with photographs, I might wear gloves, but otherwise I typically don't. Especially with thin or brittle paper, it can actually be worse for the artifact. It can be easier if you can't feel it to chip something that's brittle or exacerbate an existing tear or something like that. So we're mostly just washing our hands all the time.
Well, I thought it would be nice to wrap up with a question I know is on my mind, which is, what would be your advice for either a home collector or, I know you mentioned like people getting the family Bible or family heirlooms preserved. What would be your advice for them if they have a piece that isn't in good shape, or maybe a piece that is that they want to make sure stays that way?
I would recommend that they could get in touch with us. They could give us a call, send us an email. We're always checking our emails. They can send an image, and if they're interested in bringing it in, we do take appointments. We're by appointment only, but we're happy to look at anything, and we can give advice in person, over the phone, kind of decide what the best option is for the artifact, and if they just need better storage for it, or maybe they do want a treatment type of situation for it so that they can display it and preserve it for future generations.
Yeah, I would also say it's a good idea to pay attention to how you're storing the artifact. Generally, we tell people to make sure things are stored in conditions that are comfortable for humans. So not too hot and dry, not too warm and humid where mold can grow. Keep things away from vents, of course. And also, I feel like it's a good idea for people to document what they have, just so they can kind of keep track of something's getting worse. Like, even if you just take a picture on your phone or something, just document the condition of things.
In general, if something has been around for a long time, it probably does need some sort of attention, even in detail. But then on the other hand, I often tell people that your object may not need anything. And I think it's best to hold off and be conservative and to do as little to a piece as possible. It's when a painting, for example, does begin to show its age, the passage of time, the change of its look, the appearance of discoloration and all those things, such as the painting here in your exhibition, the view of Omaha, which after probably, I'm guessing 50, maybe even longer number of years since its last treatment has begun to show its age. And suddenly, boom, you do a cleaning and it looks terrific after just one. Now it's good for another 50 years or so, or maybe 100 years, we'll see.
We did not plan that, but that was a perfect segue into my conclusion for the evening. I do want to make sure you all know the exhibit is on display until November 21st. And Kenneth is actually here actively conserving it on select days, most Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then I think there's a couple of maybe 1 or 2 Saturdays left as well that he's here. So definitely make sure you check that out. A huge thank you to all 3 of you and your colleagues too at the Ford who helped kind of plan tonight. And thank you all for coming.